Yeah, so the intent of this is not to have me do all the talking. And trust me, if you let me, I will. So, so I need your folks' help to make that not happen. So as Jonathan mentioned, my forte has been fixing failing projects. And so I have been around a little bit. I haven't been to Australia. I've definitely spent a huge amount of time on the Pacific Rim. I've been to the Middle East. Here in the States and Canada, I've done a couple of things. And some of those projects have actually hit all of those. So, you know, the Canada, US, the Middle East, Germany, the Far East. So you're kind of like, okay, what's the mess here, right? And try to figure out what is all going on. And so I felt it like a fun task to go and write my first book called Rescue the Problem Project, which deals with the project itself and kind of the project manager's realm and what a recovery manager who comes in to fix a project, what they have to deal with. And then in, probably shortly after that came out, I started realizing that I probably should have spent a little more time on the organization, because it takes more than one person to really screw up a project, right? It takes a good concert of people, a good cacophony of things happening. So filling the execution gaps looks at the organization and the infrastructure and things that are bad about the structure itself. Okay. The one very common thing that you see in all of those, from both those aspects, those perspectives, is this whole bit of blame and who are we going to blame. And it's the first word that comes out of someone's mouth when they call me, which, by the way, just so you know, I get well over 95% of my calls Thursday noon to Friday close of business, okay, to talk about a troubled project. And I keep a little list of when people call. It's surprising when that happens. It's because someone's in the hot seat. Someone has been being bugged by their boss all week long. And finally, it's getting close to the weekend. That person doesn't want to go home and have to live with this thing on their mind and realize that Monday morning, the first word out of their boss's mouth is going to be what's going on with that flipping project. And so they want to have some new answer. And that new answer is, hey, we called somebody to come in and take a look at this thing. And he's going to be on the phone at noon. He's going to be, you know, whatever the answer is. Maybe I'm on a plane. This person has budget authority and I'm on a plane and I'm actually, you know, I'll be there at noon. And they're really looking for that. And this is the person who is either trying to be accountable or is being blamed. And that's what the very first response is of them and their boss is, who are we going to blame for this thing? Okay, what is going wrong and how, you know, who singular, who is the person who is causing this problem so we can fix this? What is the thing, singular, that's causing this? And they are definitely looking for blame and trying to find someone to point the finger at. And that's very common. And unbeknownst to me, one of the very first things that I do, and I discovered this actually while writing the books, was to try to break down that blame. It was very subconscious of trying to say, okay, let's forget about who and let's go take and do an objective audit of what's going on and see what's happening. And that was always the biggest stumbling block for people, because I would get executives coming to me who were writing my check and signing the contract and saying, no, what? We want to know what it is. And it never is it, right? It's always, to really mess things up, it really does take a joint effort among people. So this has been, this whole concept of blame and absence of accountability has been a big issue of mine for decade, 2 decades maybe, of dealing with that and how to work with it. So it's, to me, one of the core issues that happen. The challenge, of course, and this is why we're having this conversation, the challenge, of course, is how do you change that? How do you make that happen? I don't know where people are in the organization on this phone call, whether you're in a project office that has control over everything, or whether you're just a project manager who's, dealing with the crap that comes in and have to work with it. So that's kind of the interesting part here, is the mix of people we have, and everybody in that stack has to address it, and anybody can address it to a given degree. So that's kind of where we're at. Any thoughts or comments about that before we start moving here more?
Just a comment. I was thinking out loud a little bit about background. Sorry, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Cool. So I wasn't sure with the headset. Just trying it out.
What you might want to do is just say your name and just say who you are right before you start talking, because we do have people on the phone that can't see the face.
Yes. Okay, understand. So I am Manuel Giudice, and I'm based here in the UK, Reading, half an hour from London. So I work in a change consulting space. I have a fairly good understanding of the project management processes and the waterfalls and the agile methodologies. I did it for a while at the beginning of my career, and then I moved on to change management. I do basically I run a change consultancy, and I do an hybrid of leadership coaching, a change consultancy, and training. And this is around executing project and initiatives. So I've worked quite a lot alongside. I'm just giving you a little bit of a frame where I'm coming from in terms of my insight and question on this. I've supported. I've worked with corporate organizations, usually fairly big organizations. They had complex projects. So multinational projects usually, and they impacted employees over a variety of countries, 40 countries. So big initiatives. That is kind of to frame where I'm coming from. So when I work in a project, what I support a specific team is actually work with either the sponsor and the project teams that are delivering the thing, if you will. The perspective I have is how can they realize value? How can we have everyone on board? When I work here, I do three things. I work on getting accountability and commitment for the teams involved. Secondly, having the initiative led well, and thirdly, having business buy-in. That end of the frame. The question I had in mind is. Which viewpoint, Todd, were you talking about? We're talking about a viewpoint of ending blame? Because I believe a lot of it had to do with leadership. Because asking the question "who" is very different, like you said, than asking the question of what. Because the what is a root cause, you can fix it. Who is not. A good starting point. I'm just thinking out loud, if you will, here.
Mm-hmm. So when you talked about what you do, you brought up two topics which are huge gaps in the organization. And one is you're trying to fill one of those, which is change management. Most organizations don't understand change management. And then you brought up executive sponsor, and too many times, I mean, I can say I should have some standard joke about executive sponsors and project managers, because a project manager, when you talk to them about executive sponsor, there's always this, oh, I think he's at golf right now. I'm not sure, but that's another big issue. And when you say about who or what is the problem, it's hard to define that. Okay. I don't go after the who's or the what's. Okay. And when we talk about blame, people want to blame, they prefer blaming a what, because that's easier to blame a what, right? If my phone isn't working, I can blame that my phone isn't working, and the whole problem's my phone. It may even be a somewhat of a who because it's T-Mobile, right? I can now take and make a villain out of something that isn't going to fight back. If I blame John and say Jonathan Norman is the problem here, now I have a personal one-on-one dealing that I have to work with, right? So if your question gets to be whether, if I understand your question correctly, if it gets to be who do I work on, I don't think that when you're trying to when you're trying to build an organization of accountability, you don't go for a who or a what. What you're looking for is something different. It's more of maybe it's an action. So I may be not picking on Jonathan Norman, but I may be picking on something else and saying, well, you know, when Jonathan does this, he talks to people too abrasively, and therefore they get frustrated and then they start to shut down. Maybe when I'm talking about an executive sponsor, which I'll tell you right now, a lot of problems I see when we walk into organizations is the executive sponsor is not holding accountability. Then I may be talking about actions that people do that don't underscore accountability. I don't necessarily talk directly about the executive sponsor, especially in public. I will at times sit down with the executive sponsor and talk about what they feel their job responsibility is. Okay. So one of the things that I carry with me everywhere I go, as an example, is I carry an executive sponsor job description. Okay. So I'm not addressing a specific action that a specific person is doing, but I'm saying, hey, so here, let's sit down. This is what I think my job is as what I'm doing. And this is what I think your job is. And I actually hand them that job description, and we go down through that and we start crossing things off and saying, no, this is my job. No, this is your job. And we trade things back and forth, trying to make sure that we got that concept right. Then I bring up some pseudo hypotheticals. And when I say pseudo hypotheticals, they're a hypothetical situation, but they're framed in the context of what I'm dealing with, right? So that we can now discuss this hypothetical, which probably isn't much of a hypothetical, and say, now how and who would handle and make the adjustments here? What do we have to do? And so what I'm trying to get to is a point of not blaming someone for something and trying to get a decent conversation going. So strongly, I'm leading up because an executive sponsor is generally part of that tier of people who are my bosses, right? I probably have 2 or 3, but the executive sponsor is probably one of those that's on that team. And so I'm very squarely leading up, trying to get these people to change their way of doing things. And they're very much in the blame mode. And I'm pulling them out of that and trying to say, you know, who does what and who should be handling this. So that's kind of how I do it. So I don't, you know, you might call it a what because I'm going after actions and what they're doing, but I'm not really going after a what as far as, oh, that piece of technology, that cell phone, that thing, and pointing at a specific thing. I take it much more generically. The minute you start to try to zero in on one thing that's causing a problem, then you start getting right back into that blame mode. So the very first thing you have to do is get people into this accountability mode and get them out of that immediate blame mode so that you can roll forward. Now, did that address your question, Manuel? Is it Manuel?
It is Manuel, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. It did, and understand how you kind of mentioned that. I had I usually, and I'm trying to kind of fit into the angle of the conversation. Maybe we can move on and I can leave it aside.
Let me jump in here, and forgive me if I'm being rather an officious facilitator, but we've only got a limited time. So I wondered if we could engage some of the other people.
Jonathan, it's John Chapman. Could I proffer an opinion here?
Yeah, please do, John.
Please.
Yeah, hi, Todd. A couple of things that you mentioned there. They asked you the question, who can we blame? They're not ringing you up to say, how can we recover the project? So the opening gambit is finger pointing. How much do you look behind the culture of the organization to understand, is this a cultural issue as opposed to just a project issue?
I look a huge amount. I mean, when you're talking about a blame versus accountability, I mean, you're talking culture, period. End of story, full stop. And so that is, when I get that call that, you know, who are we going to blame? They quite often have, to make it worse, they actually have we think it's this, this, and this, which you just immediately have to throw out and start over again, because that's so steeped in their culture and their bias of looking at things. And by the way, you haven't been able to fix this, so that's wrong. That you are having to look almost immediately at the culture of what's going on in the organization. That's why I feel that this concept of blame versus accountability is so huge, is because it really is at the core of the culture. You know, as I say this stuff, and I'm not super steeped in the UK politics, although you guys do make the headlines on a regular basis over here. I'm sure that our politics makes good headlines over there too, at least for the comedians, okay? But when I say that, and I talk about trying to, the way I go in, and yes, I think, God, these guys are gonna go, oh, geez, he's just a politically correct jerk. And I am extremely politically correct, or try to be, okay, which is contrary to what I see going on in the political world, okay, where no one wants to be politically correct. Because you do have to take and temper things down. You do have, I mean, that's part of getting into a culture. I can go into some of the most abrasive cultures and try to do things, and it's if you don't follow that, it's a mess. You know, I work, if any of you have been around, you know that if you've been working in Southeast Asia, the Pacific Rim, or whatever you want to call that whole range of things there, any of those, that range of people, and then you go from a culture there to a culture in the Middle East, you've just gone through just a little bit of culture shock, right? You've gone from the three yeses, which some mean yes, some mean no, some means maybe, to the world of sitting across the desk and screaming at one another. So if you don't look and absorb that culture, you're in dead meat. And that's where, like I say, accountability and blame are right smack square in the center of that.
So in that context, and looking at things like the Trompenaars, well, you know, Fons Trompenaars Riding the Waves of Culture and the Lewis model, you're suggesting we've got two things. One, we should look at the culture of the country or the region, and secondly, the culture of the business. And by understanding both, then to try and say, well, how do we tease out what the real issue is here, as opposed to trying to say, well, I'm just going to find someone and have it out with them.
Yeah, so I focus mostly on the culture of the company. Okay, and I know that that's dangerous, but I don't have time to learn the culture of the country as much. Over time, that seeps in. So like the three yeses that I mentioned in the Pacific Rim, where no one says no, everyone says yes, and you just have to understand which yes is the no yes. That took time to learn, because that's actually embedded in the culture of the country, of the region, where the culture of the organization is generally easier to understand and heavily influenced by that. The way, you know, when I was in the Middle East, believe it or not, the way I picked up the light breaking moment where the you know, bing, it comes on, was when I came home one time and my kids wanted to watch a movie, and we watched a movie out of the UK, out of some UK artists. I think you may know them. but they made the movie called The Life of Brian. Okay. And when I watched that movie, I went, oh my God, it's not a comedy, it's a documentary. Okay. And I learned a heck of a lot about the culture of the region by actually being there, seeing that movie and what the Monty Python troupe did with that. And then I pulled in some of the culture of the company, or the country, excuse me. But that was, it starts with the company first, not the country. I can't absorb the country in a short time. And you can be in a culture where there's really not a lot of blame, but when you get into this problem, the company wants to blame.
Yeah, understood. Thank you.
Okay, I hope that helps, John.
That's useful. Thank you.
Yeah. So anyone else? Do you want to throw in a question to Todd? If not, I will willingly do so. Todd, one of the problems with being a project manager is you're kind of the one holding the baby. And have you any advice? What can you do if you're sensing that there is a blame culture? It's as a project manager, it's very difficult to counter that culture all on your own. I mean, maybe the glib answer is to leave the project and leave the company, but if you want to stay put, are there practical things that you can do without assuming all of the world on your shoulders, a bit like Atlas?
Well, I don't know if it's an Atlas type thing, but I am a little bit different in that respect. I was actually talking to somebody over lunch yesterday, and they made some comment about Mr. Trump's chief of staff, and that somebody that they knew was trying to vie for the chief of staff position. I thought, God, that would be a really amazing position to be in. I'd only last in it for maybe a couple of hours, but boy, to be inside that culture and see what's going on would be just an education all on its own. An hour's worth of time would be years worth of education. But it is up to you as that person who's going to go fix something. And this is true of any, and whether you're running a project or whether you're rescuing a project or whatever, because I don't want this to be a conversation about me. I want it to be a conversation about project managers. Is you create what you exhibit, right? So if you go into a culture, you're in a culture that's all solely blame, and you turn around and you just basically say the buck stops here, right? And I don't know if that phrase translates across cultures, I guess, but I am the accountable one. I'm going to take care of everything. If you're going to blame somebody, blame me, damn it. And just, that's the way it's going to be. And you shield your team. You don't, make excuses for anything. If somebody tells you something, you just give them an honest answer. Hey, I don't know the answer to that. Let me go find out and I'll be back. Okay. It takes a while with the organization. With the team, it takes a very short time. The team has to see you take a bullet once for them, and you all of a sudden have the support of probably 80% of the team. And I work really hard to find those situations where I'll take a bullet for somebody, okay, and be standing, I'll make a decision, I'll stand up in front of an executive committee and say, yeah, hey, I made this decision a week ago without you guys knowing because we had to get things moving, and this meeting wasn't until this week, and I didn't want to wait the week, and so I made this decision, we went that way, and people get all hot and bothered. Some people don't, they go, okay, great, thank you, Todd. And then what comes out of that is the team sees that and they say, hey, this guy's going to stand up for us. He's not going to let this stuff filter down. He's not going to, he's not going to let that come back and affect us. And that buys the team. And you can do that usually very quickly. And when I say that, I mean like within a week or two of being on a project, you can set that tone and you can change how your entire team is working. You will also highlight absolutely anybody who thrives on that blame inside your team, because they will fight you. They come out almost with vengeance. I mean, you spark something in them that wants to come out and just go, oh, you want to play that game, huh? And they're in your face, and that helps you start to put together what your new team's going to look like, because that person's got to get off the team. You know, I'm ruthless when it comes to that. If you're not going to play the game right, you're not going to play on this team. And when people, then if you take somebody who was the instigator and you move them off the team, anybody who is not in your camp and supporting you on that project now is, because now the people are going, whoa, he means business. He's getting the infection out of this, and we're going to move forward. At that point, now that you have a team and you have a project, that, because I'll promise you that once you start doing that, the project is going to start moving to some degree. And so you can start saying, hey, here's where, here's the progress you're making. It takes the heat from the rest of the culture away from you. And so people start to look at it. So if you're in to fix a failing project, or if you're in just a project, if the minute you start doing that, you affect your team immediately, and the people around you get affected to a much lesser degree pretty quickly. Now, you can't then take an executive sponsor who is totally into blame, and you can't change them quickly, and they're going to always be a thorn in your side, and you're just going to have to, continue to take the bullet and let them come after you. But I think after a while they get tired of it. They get tired of that. Hey, I just keep dealing this stuff at him. He just takes it, and you're taking all the fun out of it, right? But then you could also work at switching your sponsor, and that there's a variety of avenues to do that. And I don't think
Todd,
many
can I just interrupt there?
Really,
Todd,
yeah.
John here. Can I just interrupt before you move on to the sponsorship bit? It's an interesting what you say, because that takes a level of emotional maturity to stand back from a situation, doesn't it? And see what it is. If you read Man's Search for Meaning, Frankl said that that's what separated out some people from others. Can
it's
you
really
stand
interesting.
back?
I'm reading that book right now.
It, doesn't he? Covey talks about it in his 7 Habits, doesn't he? We can decide our response.
Yes. And it is really odd you bring that up, because I am reading that book by Frankl right now. I'm about halfway through it. And I was like, I gotta get up at 4:30 in the morning, so I can't read this book tonight. So I had to put it down last night. But yes, that's exactly it. We are in control of our own response. That what Frankl says in what I've read of that book so far is spot on. And so yes, John, 100%.
Yeah.
Sorry, thank you. I just want to make that point before you continued.
Yeah, I mean,
no, excellent.
Let me jump in again. I'm enjoying this position of power, and invite any of the others. Some of our later joiners, Joel or Becca. I mean, have you any questions or any comments at this stage, or indeed the wider group? Any thoughts on how you deal with this kind of culture when you encounter it? Okay, yeah. Go ahead, Viana. Yeah.
It seems to me that I'm Viana. I'm currently based in Brazil. I had the experience of working on major projects, Navy projects, and shipyards. So we had international companies working with us, Germans, British, and French now, and German again. And it seems that the German will won a frigate for us. What I could accumulate during this 20 plus years of experience on managing all these projects is that you have to develop trust. It's leadership. You mentioned integrity. It's a means of integrity. You take a bullet for your team. That's right. You have to be people. The team has to trust you as an element of trust, but you need to develop trust among your subcontractors, your contractors. And this requires some governance structure. You can't have a clear interface management. You need to have this interface management, because blame normally raises where you have gray areas. So who is responsible for that? And still, you need a structure. If you can have the experience of managing integrated teams, that would be great. I had a project that we were taking too long to develop the system. It's a real-time system. And we had three separate teams working together. But they weren't collaborating, but they didn't trust each other, okay? So blame was always raising. So finger pointing, that's their responsibility. I'm not supposed to do this. Until I reached them, I arrived at the project, and we managed to integrate the teams, put everybody to work together as a unique team, okay? We assume all the risk for this, so kind of, well, you shouldn't be doing that, but I'm not alone. The Malmo Copenhagen bridge, it seems that has the same challenge, and they managed to assume all the risks and put the teams to work together, to collaborate. That's essential for major projects. If you can manage the teams to work together in an integrated fashion, you're gonna face huge challenges. Because when an issue raises and people start complaining about the issue, you're gonna have everybody will run into a protect mode and self-protection mode, and then you destroy the culture of the project, and everything falls apart and conflicts raise. So you have to constantly be managing conflicts among subcontractors. Who is the responsibility? Is the project responsibility. It's not one contractor. So you have to make clear assignments of responsibilities. So accountability is important. But when an issue raised, you have to put everybody on the table and find a way to solve it. That's that project of the system. What we couldn't do in 3 years, we did in 6 months, putting people to work together. So that's what I can share with you guys. And integrated project teams is a great stuff to work together, so collaborate. The issue is uncertainty, how you manage risks and assign risks to everybody who is more capable. But when an issue raises, somebody bring up a question that wasn't being assigned or wasn't being detected yet, you have to find a way to put people together and work and find who can better handle that situation. Okay.
Yeah. So Vienna, one of the things that I think I hear you saying there is this: with subcontractors, you have another party involved, at least here in the US you do, and that is purchasing, procurement, and those folks, okay? And as a project manager, you're kind of sitting as this ancillary person off to the side, yet you can still fit that culture in there. And one of the things that I work very hard at, and I think this is big, is that you have to start treating subcontractors like they're part of the team, and too often they're treated as subcontractors and being apart from the team. And so once you start bringing them in and treating them like human beings, then I think you find that things change quite a bit. You still have the problem of the procurement groups or whatever it is that is handling them still treating them like jerks, and so now and then you have to deal with that, really 3 cultures, and dealing with the procurement culture and dealing with the culture of the project to bring that subcontractor back in. But I think that you can mostly make that work, and I think that's what you're saying that you've done. And the minute you get to that point of let's be objective about this and get the finger pointing out as much as you can, and the minute somebody points fingers, you either do it quietly and politically correct, but I've actually been very straightforward with people and say, stop it. That is not allowed here. We're not going to have someone point at someone else and say it's their problem. We're going to work with that person and say, is there a problem here? Because, you know, he who points is probably it's just as guilty as anybody else. They're trying to sidestep. I just don't let it happen.
Yeah.
Todd, you've got a question there from John in the chat.
Okay. how much does a contract encourage a blame culture? Is that, you know, the whole point of a contract is to make things black and white, right? And that is that is just, that just doesn't happen. There is no black and white in this world, okay? And that is that's a huge problem. I usually, that's one of the first things I read is the contract, and I read the statement of work. And then when someone starts bringing up the contract, I say, hey, a contract's good. A good contract is good for one thing, and that's getting into the project and getting out of the project. And unless we're getting into the project, or unless we're getting out of the project, then let's just sit the contract off to the side and ignore the contract for right now. Let's not battle about the contract. Let's look at the statement of work and what the statement of work says, and look for the holes. So I think, Viana, it was you who said, you know, hey, there's this concept of what people are supposed to do, and now there's also these gray areas. Okay, those are the holes in the statement of work, and we have to figure out how those holes are being filled, and just work about that objectively. And then, okay, so we take on part of that, you take on part of that. There's one project I worked on where we had a person who was supposed to take care of, there were 13 deliverables, believe it or not, it was 13. And one of those deliverables, it was just ambiguous of who was supposed to do it. And it had one of these, you know, the phrase was complex equipment was going to be omitted from the duties of the contract. And now define what complex is. And we went round and round and round on that. And I had to rely on a third party who, inside the company, I reported to him, he's part of my team, to actually set that straight. And he just never could do it. He could never, ever make that answer. He was from sales. And so at some point he had to say no, and salespeople are genetically wired not to say no. Okay.
Excellent. Good.
I guess I saw something else pop up there.
Yes.
Saw my screen move.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, it's for me again, Todd. It was just to say, if you look at the work of the IACCM and Tim Cummins, Jonathan, you know him, don't you?
Yes.
You know, they say that the contract law just has not caught up with the reality of project delivery. There's areas that you can't define at the outset, and yet it says, well, absolutely want to know who's going to do what, when they're going to do it, and how they're going to do it, and what's it going to cost. And yet there's so many unknowns. You've actually got to then recognize that the contract has to become a working document, and you've got to then realize that it has to change, and you've got to work with people. It's frightening stuff, that.
So, John, I'm not familiar with how you guys structure things. I know, so I've been called in a number of times to actually help set up projects and establish the very beginnings of the project, right? Even before the contracts are written. And I am beyond anal retentive when it comes to one concept, and that is the contract and the statement of work are completely separate documents, and they should never be conflated in any way, shape, or form. Let's get the contract, we'll write the contract. It's how we get in and how we get out, how we handle issues inside the actual work that we're going to do. We agree with that? Great. Done. Now, let's look at statements of work and look at those statements of work and figure out what those are and assign a cost to each one of those statements of work, okay? And getting that concept in place immediately sets the stage for, okay, we have this gray area that Viana was talking about, and now how do we handle that? So it sets up a culture and this concept that we don't know everything that's going on, and we're going to have more statements of work that come along. And you have to be a strong project manager, but you also have to get with the people, because what people want to do is do this, you know, fixed price bid contract thing. And, well, wait a minute, now they're just going to keep change ordering us to death. And it's, no, we're going to have change orders. It's something we have to deal with, but it's we go into this realizing that that problem's going to exist.
All hell's kicking off with somebody's phone there.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah. Excellent. So Todd, I mean, I guess just looking at the environments in which you're working, are there approaches, techniques that are beginning to gather sway in terms of changing away from blame cultures? I mean, there's a lot of talk about co-working, collaboration, alliancing. Are these kinds of things making a big difference in your views? In your view?
I'd say a lot of the talk is just talk, and that's the problem, right? Is that people are really good about throwing around the buzzwords and all that. I mean, I'm guilty of that myself. Just 2 days ago, I took a table that a guy by the name of I think his name is Michael Timms put together on accountability versus blame, and threw that table out on LinkedIn, and it has like 7,000 different views of it, which is like, wow, it's still cooking out there, because it tries to boil things down once again to black and white, and I almost kicked myself for putting it out there, except for that it has 7,000 views. I kicked myself for putting it out there because it perpetuates this concept of, okay, here's the talk, and here's the right way, here's the wrong way, and the talk does that. It's the action, and John said something about I think it was John said something about emotionally intelligent, and I consider myself probably one of the least emotionally intelligent people on the face of the earth. And then, you know, John will point out that that action that I'm doing is emotionally intelligent. I don't think about it that way. I just don't. And so it's hard for me to look at those buzzwords, because it's not just one thing. Okay. Yeah. And I think that's, I don't mean to plug my book here, but this is probably a really important part of filling execution gaps, is that it's looking at 6 different things that I see as the 6 big gaps in the organization. And what people don't understand is they can't handle 6 things at once. They can't. We can handle 2, maybe 3 problems at a time. And if we get above that, we really can't do service to any of them, right? And I don't care what that is. The magical number, the magic of 3 is just huge in the human mind. If I go into a company and they tell me that they have 12 strategic goals they're going to meet this year, I have to really work at not laughing, okay? Because they're not going to make 12 of them, okay? They're going to make 3 of them is what they're going to make. And they pare it down to 3 and go after those 3. And we've actually done work, the company's actually done work to make that happen. So when you look at what people have to do and you start throwing around buzzwords, you're really talking about looking at one thing, right? So if you look even just at this one thing, culture versus, blame versus accountability, that's just one thing. Once you get that, you've drained the lake a little bit, but you now have to go after the other stuff, which is still causing you problems. It's only taking enough water out of the lake that you can now maybe navigate better and see what you're about ready to run into. But if you don't take care of those other things, it's not going to happen. And if you don't take care of them quickly, because what'll happen is people say, okay, now we're to this culture or the project's in a no blame mode, but we're still screwing up. Well, yeah, because there's still 5 other things that are in here that we haven't found that we need to dig through, right? Yeah. So going after any one of these things makes a dent, but it's a small dent. It's when you start taking 4 or 5 things together and taking those 4 or 5 things together, that the 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 doesn't equal 5. If I did enough ones in there, yes. It doesn't get to 5. It actually gets to like 25, right? And so once you start taking that group together, that's where the big ones. That's where the big hit is at. Okay. So when I'm looking at those things, the biggest problem I have is one at a time. And you know, there's millions of books on the leadership gap. Well, great, we do have a leadership gap, but if you put all the leaders in there, but you still have, you know, poor change management, or you just don't have alignment with your projects, everyone's being great leaders, but nobody's going anywhere, right? Yes. Because all the leaders are pointing a different direction. So you got to solve all of those problems at one time. It's not easy.
Yes, yeah. I mean, we've talked a lot about emotional intelligence and the human aspect of this whole thing, and that's something that I'm particularly interested in, and I have a lot of time for. It's interesting on the top of that list of culture versus blame versus accountability. You've got people are the problem versus people are problem solvers. One of the things I learned
See, blame people. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Blame people.
Well, one of the things I learned a while back, actually, in the context of change, really, was that if I want somebody to change, or if I want people to change, and I know what that change is, and I can see that change is, and they don't seem to be changing, then the onus is on me. It's not on them. I get it. They don't get it. And I think if I found that a very empowering kind of life lesson was, oh, actually, I need to reframe how I see this. If I just point the finger, we're not going to get anywhere. And pointing the finger, I mean, you do have that kind of satisfaction, and it kind of plays to your demons. But actually, if you think, oh no, they're not getting it, okay, I shouldn't expect them to get it to start off with. And what am I going to do in order to enable them to get it? Is the kind of where I kind of start from.
Well, if we go back to something I said earlier, and I'm surprised nobody picked up on it. When I go into an organization, like I say, I take the bullet and all that, and I usually have one or two people who stand out as people who, well, what do you mean? We need to blame, and I get them off the project, right? That is, that's a form of blame, right? I'm saying, yes, hey, this person's not in here, and they're out of here. I would not do that if that person was in my functional organization. The situation demands it because I'm stepped in, I'm being paid to fix a project. I'm not being there, I'm not being paid to correct the issues with that person, right? And so when I take that person off the project, I generally do work with their functional manager and say, this is why I need them off the project. And, I just can't have this right now. And if that functional manager does come back to me and says, oh, I see the problem. Okay, let me handle that. I'll fix it. Then that person doesn't go off the project, right? So I'm just pushing off a piece of work to somebody else to get done. But there are times whenever you're in a hurry, you can't turn around and not have some level of finger pointing and say, hey, this person's a problem and they got to get out of here. You just need to make sure when you do that, you do it in a way so that person has a corrective action plan behind it, right? So, because you want to get rid of the problem in the long run. So I have worked with some people where they have had a bad attitude and their boss or someone else helped me, adjust that. Okay. So you really are kind of walking a fine line, especially if you're in a hurry. If you've got something, and most organizations are in a hurry, you've got to do some level of making things happen, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And you do get idiots on the project as well.
Oh, I thought you were talking about Todd there, John. But yeah, good. Well,
comedians can cut down to the core of cultural issues extremely fast,
Yeah.
and we laugh at it, but there's such a vein of truth. I'm not joking when I talk about the life of Brian as being this cultural epiphany that I had. I did take that movie back to it was in Israel, and back to the I was staying at kibbutz. We played that video in a bar in the kibbutz hotel, and there was our team and another team from Germany, most of them from former East Germany, and we were all watching this thing, and we were having this, the bar was erupting in just gut level laughter, and the bartender couldn't understand what we were laughing at, which of course made it even all the more funny.
Okay, good. So we've just got 10 minutes left. So does anyone have another thread that you'd like to throw in at this stage?
I just wanted to call out. Don't mean to make it awkward, but I think there's two sides to it based on what Todd was saying originally, and I've been listening to all the different conversations. And how I like how when he was explaining that, taking the bullet to taking accountability, he actually got 80% or 80%, if I got the number right, of people on board. And the 20%, you have to kind of deal with it. I think this is, and again, I don't mean to make you awkward, this is a splendid example of leadership behavior versus, and then you can be in a leadership position. The way I look at it is leadership behavior. And I think one can have all of the different models and contracts and methodologies to do things that did. But at the end of the day, people change. And also to your point, Jonathan, we model other people.
Yeah.
And once you do what you did, to me, this is an extraordinary thing. If I were to report to a person that hacks like that, it basically is raising the standard for everyone that they actually can see that. And that is, I believe that's one of the most, and I've seen it across different industry, different leaders and managers at different levels. Once that level of standard is raised up to such an extent where, you know, I'm not here to be right, I'm here to deliver an output of value, and I'm going to take it all on. I think, like you said over time, if you hang in there, that will break through eventually through leadership. And that is extremely powerful. Just a comment. It's not really a question. Something that came up for that. So I think it's a kind of an inside out, right? There is the tangible side, and then actually, what are we actually doing? How are we showing up as leaders? And that is a major ripple out effect. I just wanted to point it out because I thought that was pretty powerful.
Thank you.
Success is contagious. That's what I say. Success is contagious.
Hi, sorry, you mentioned earlier about switching out the sponsor. How do you go about doing that?
There's a number of ways that I've done that. The most controversial is, and one that I use in an ethics talk that I talk about, because it borders on whether I was being ethical at the time. I had a sponsor who was very, very negative, challenging to the project. And once I got done understanding what was going on with the project, I developed other people, the confidants inside the organization, right, that were part of that kind of executive tier that I reported to. And I would start leaking out and kind of, well, I'm thinking it's this way, and do kind of what I call my Columbo thing. And I don't know if you guys know who Columbo is. He's a detective, U.S. detective show where he kind of acts dumb and walks in and asks, you know, okay, I don't quite get it here, but you know, you say this, but you're doing that. Can you explain what's going on, right? And so you act stupid and go in and ask questions. And so I'm doing that with the overall tier, and I find that there's another person of equal value, of equal power, to be a good executive sponsor, and they're very positive on the project. So I see a person who is a potential sponsor who is very positive. They have the power, they have the connections, and I have my sponsor who is very negative. And I literally took the data to my existing sponsor, and I said, here's what we got. This is in real tough shape. I don't know whether I can pull this out. There's a possibility, but boy, if this goes bad, it's going to look like crap on your resume. This is just not going to be good for you. And then I go to the other sponsor who I want to have be my sponsor, and I say, you know, here's the bit, here's the project, here's the data. I show them exactly the same data. It's in real trouble, but boy, if we can pull this off, this would look really good on your resume. And you know, it's much longer. It's not that these were the full conversations, but I build that rapport with these two people. Well, one person who I'm just saying, okay, you're not fit for this thing, but you know, this is how it's going to damage you. And here's the other person where I say, this is how it's going to benefit you. And I know that if I switch sponsors, that the probability of the project succeeding skyrockets. And once I get their attitudes kind of adjusted, then I go to whoever I can and say, I think we need a sponsor switch. What can we do? Well, do you have any ideas? Well, how about this person over here? Why don't you go talk to them? So I kick it up 2 levels and have that person come down and talk to the sponsor I wanted to switch it to. And the sponsor I want to switch it to says, yeah, boy, I'd love to do this thing. I think we can make this happen. They're all excited. And the person who was the prior sponsor says, I want this potato off of my plate, get it to someone else. And nobody gets hurt. Nobody feels they've been slighted, fired, changed, or whatever. It was this nice, convenient handover. And people say I'm not being ethical because I'm telling 2 different stories to 2 different people. And I'm saying, but wait a minute, the data's exactly the same. It's not the data that's changed. It's the attitude of how I talk to people that's different. And that change made all the difference in the world. Other times I've been able to actually go above to someone. I have a connection in that hiring process where I can actually say to my 2 levels up type person, hey, we need a different sponsor in here, and this isn't working. Sometimes the sponsor is just overloaded, and I have to get things reprioritized. That's one of the biggest problems with sponsors is they don't have a job description, so they don't know what they're supposed to do, but then they're given this project with here, just add this to your plate, and it's not prioritized. And so sometimes it just takes prioritization. And I've gotten sponsors to switch their attitude just by making sure that their bosses have properly prioritized their work. Okay. So Gina, that was Gina, I think, asked that question. Gina,
yes.
Not 100%, you know, there's never one answer for this. It's always kind of looking at what's going on and trying to figure out if there is, you know, what that root cause problem is. If it's the person themselves, you got to change them. If it's the priorities, then you've got to change the parameters they're working under to move things. So you have to do some analysis at that level, and you got to make sure that you have a sponsor to land on. You just can't throw out a sponsor. You got to have someone else who you know is committed, can make things happen.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sure.
Interesting. I mean, I think you've talked about it before, Todd, but I think this idea of a job description for sponsors is really the fantastic idea. And
it's like the simplest thing in the world, but again, it was when I was doing all the research for the book. This is the big thing I noticed is anytime I talk to a project manager, so their sponsors were huge problems. I talked to executives and they say sponsors are doing just fine. And that was the split. That was where I saw this split, and I had to figure out what was going on. And it's the executives thought they're doing their job just fine because they had defined what they were supposed to do, not someone else defining what they were supposed to do. Project managers have a fairly well-defined set of a fairly good job description that's now at this point universal. Executive sponsors don't.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, can I ask the group, have you had any experience of sponsor job descriptions? Have you seen anything like that? Is that something that you use in your projects?
I've seen one of the UK central government departments actually issue out a letter to the sponsors stating responsibilities.
Mm-hmm. And yeah. How would you rate that letter, Gina? Was that, or did you think, oh, actually that's good, or?
I thought it was actually quite good.
Yeah.
Is that public? Is that something that be shared with the group?
I don't have a copy. It was in a previous organisation that I worked for. Sorry.
No, I'd love to see that. I mean, to me, that's a big thing. I love to see what that has to say.
I can find out which government department it was and maybe contact you directly.
Okay, thank you.
The one that I'm familiar with, I don't know if you know the organisation, but the Global Alliance for the Project Professions, GAPS.
Okay.
They have a sponsor framework for evaluating the competency of sponsors.
Okay.
And they have several different criteria to go through and evaluate them, and you can download that. That's off there. You can just get it for free off their website.
Oh, okay.
This is the Global Alliance for what?
For the project professions. Yeah, GAPS. The three main criteria is taking accountability for the project, which aligns pretty well with what we're talking with tonight, supporting the project manager and supporting the project.
Yeah,
taking accountability for the success of the project is probably the biggest item in there.
Yeah, brilliant. Good. Excellent.
Jonathan, it's John Chapman. Can I just offer a final comment on that one?
Please
if you remember, didn't the Government Project Delivery Authority produce a delivery capability framework?
They did. It's excellent. So I do recommend the Government Functional Project Delivery Framework. It's available. I mean, if you just Google it, you'll find it. Otherwise, I can share it with the group, and it's well worth looking at. Really, really good.
Thank you.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Well, thank you. That's our hour. So thank you all for taking part. Please do feedback any thoughts and comments. This is the first time we've done this, so your experience as to how was it for you and whether we should do it again. And Todd, thank you ever so much.
Oh, thank you.
An ungodly hour, and you've been pretty good, actually. Yeah. Yeah.
I only had to get up an hour early, so it's not that big. Matt,
Yes.
thank you for that link. Matt just posted a link to that GAPS organization. So thank you very much, Matt.
Thanks.
But I also want to thank everybody for being online, and please connect with me on Facebook or LinkedIn or wherever, and ask any other questions offline. Some of you guys have been very quiet, and I haven't seen you pop up on my screen here. So any questions or whatever, this can continue on in other forums and stuff like that.